everyone, and welcome to the Thriving Relationship Show. I am Christine Eartheart, your host and founder of the Center for Thriving Relationships. And I am so grateful and excited that you are here and to get to support you in experiencing more love, connection, understanding, and joy in your relationship. And today's guest is one who has deeply impacted my own personal life. And so I am extra thrilled and honored to have him here. And if you know my story, so my beloved Bret and I have been together for 20 years now. And despite how magical the beginning was, we, like nearly every couple on the planet, got to a really difficult moment. And there was a night that we were sitting on the couch that I'll never forget, where we turned and looked at each other and we realized our relationship is no longer bringing out our best. And we realized we had three choices. One was to just keep doing things how we'd always been doing them. And we realized that probably wouldn't get us very far. The second choice was to just bless each other on our separate paths, realizing our differences were just too great. We were too incompatible. We weren't meant to be. Or third choice was to dive in and learn everything we possibly could about relationships. Because even though we both had done lots of personal growth and we considered ourselves kind and loving people, it was very humbling, and we hadn't uniquely learned the skill set on how to have a great relationship. So we thought, just maybe there's more potential here. So that night, we ordered this stack of books. At the time, it was DVD courses and CDs. I have some of them here for show and tell for those of you that are watching. So here, Lasting Love. This was from 2006. It's a DVD. We don't even own a DVD player anymore. CD courses. This book, Conscious Loving, one of the first relationship books I ever read. If you looked inside, it looks actually like a journal. There are so many just like notes and scribbles, and it's very, very well loved. And it completely transformed our relationship. So Bret and I devoted every Friday night was our conscious date night, and we never anticipated doing this work in the world, but because of what we experienced, we felt this responsibility to help support other couples. And years later, we ended up going out to California and went through the Conscious Loving and Living coach certification program with today's guest and his lovely wife. And I will say, after the first round of that, we actually got engaged. It was in California, and we drove that night. The seminar ended. We drove that night to Sequoia National Park, and it was like 3 a.m. And I was like, Bret, where are we going? And there was General Sherman tree, which is the largest living organism on the planet. And Bret proposed there in the middle of the night. There was snow all around, and to really represent the bigness of our love, which was such a marker. You know, here we were in this really struggling place. And then after the seminar that today's guest led, that's where we were getting engaged. So I am infinitely grateful. Today's guest is truly one of the greatest relationship pioneers of our time, with eternal ripples. Like, the world will never be the same because of the impact that this man has had along with his wife. So I have the honor of introducing you all to Dr. Gay Hendricks. I'm going to read his professional bio so you know some of his many, many, many accomplishments. So Gay Hendricks, PhD, has been a leader in the fields of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies for more than 45 years. After earning his PhD in counseling psychology from Stanford, Gay served as professor of counseling psychology at the University of Colorado for 21 years. He has written more than 40 books, including bestsellers such as 5 Wishes, The Big Leap, and Conscious Loving, and The Genius Zone, which was just released in 2021. Thank you so, so much, Gay, for all you've done. You have been, I know, featured on, you've offered seminars worldwide, appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. And you're currently continuing your new mystery series that began with the first rule of 10. And you also co-founded the Spiritual Cinema Circle, which distributes inspirational movies and conscious entertainment to subscribers in 70 plus countries. So, and I know we could go on and on about all the phenomenal things you have done. So welcome, Gay.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. It's my pleasure to be here.
So there are so many fields you've explored, relationships being one of them. We're going to touch on several of them. And can you share, just for starters, what inspired you to focus on relationships? Like, why is that so important, and how did it specifically call to you?
Yeah, well, when I was in the 9th grade, I'll tell you how far I came. When I was in the 9th grade, my English teacher gave us an assignment over the weekend to write a 3-page essay on something we felt strongly about. That was the task, And so I turned in on Monday when I came back, I turned in this 3-page paper, and it was called, I'd completely forgotten about this until a few years back when my niece was down at my mother's house in Florida and looking through a bunch of stuff in the attic and everything. And she found this essay that I'd written when I was 14 years old. And the title of it says, "Why I Will Never, Ever Get Married." And it was this 3-page rant about it. Basically, the theme of it was, I'm not going to get married because everybody in my family that's married look like they're sleepwalking, and they don't ever have any new opinions. They have the same arguments that they had 20 years ago. They're still having them. And, so I was just completely set. And I said, also, my grandparents have been married for more than 50 years, but I've really never heard them say a kind word to each other. How does that work? And so I was catching on early, but my first take was, I'm just not going to participate. So isn't that a great start for a relationship expert? There's that old saying about, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan, and that was my plan. I'm never going to get married. So I end up writing 12 books on marriage and relationship and talking about it on Oprah in front of 10 million people and everything like that. So, but I'm glad in a way I started off that way, because at least I was focusing on what I didn't want in relationship. I didn't want to sleepwalk, I didn't want to have the same conversation over and over again every year, like I heard going on around me. And also, I hope this isn't the case for your listeners, but there was quite a lot of addiction in my family. And it looked to me like people used their addictions to keep from being close to each other and to keep from, making something really big out of their lives. And so anyway, I was having all those concerns even when I was 14 years old. And then my relationships in my teens and my 20s, none of them were very satisfying. I had a long one of about 4 years, but that was kind of turned into a nightmare. And anyway, I always said my relationships in my teens and 20s resembled the trajectory of the Titanic, because I would start with a great fanfare, and then 6 months later I would hit an iceberg and the relationship would be over. And it actually took me into my 30s to figure out where the iceberg was, that it wasn't out there in the world, it was down in me. And it was because I didn't know anything about how to communicate my feelings. I didn't know how to solve a problem without, running for the victim position. All those kinds of things that we now know create intimacy or lack of intimacy. I just had to kind of learn them from the seat of my pants, because I didn't really know anything about that area. And so, I don't know, did you ever have a course in junior high school or high school on how to have a successful relationship? I didn't either. I mean, why teach geometry to people if you can't figure out, why you're doing what you're doing in relationship and how to have a healthy relationship? Maybe it's not taught because none of the teachers know how. They would be. But anyway, that's another subject for another conversation. But in my case, I got all the way through college without even having a single course on how to be happy or how to have a good relationship or any of those essential things of life. Probably you can get a lot more of that now than you could back when I was going to high school and things like that. So, I think I got really interested in it just by making a series of mistakes and realizing, what have I got to do to correct this? And it wasn't actually until I was 34 years old that I had the breakthrough that led me to have a good relationship with my wife now, Katie. She and I are coming up on our 43rd year together. So it works. The stuff works. We just practice what we preach, and things keep getting better and better. But before I met her, I just hadn't figured out how relationships work. And on this one magic day, when I was 34, I had a realization that I mess up all my relationships, or did at the time, through one of three things. usually I mess them up by not telling the truth about things, like not being honest about my feelings, not being able to say, I felt hurt about that, or I'm scared, or I'm angry about that. I just didn't have that kind of thing in my vocabulary at the time. So I didn't know how to communicate the truth. And the second thing I really started focusing on was every time a problem would come up in my relationship, whether it was one I'd been in for a month or a year, both of us would run for the victim position and then begin to project and blame the other person. And that, once I realized that, that changed everything, because I realized, oh, if you've got two people running for the victim position and seeing the other person as the perpetrator, how are you ever going to solve a problem like that? And so then the third thing I realized is, oh, I always sacrifice my creativity for the relationship. I end up getting involved in relationship drama, and that saps my creative energy. So I don't get as much creative stuff done. So this one magic day, I had that realization. And then the magic is that I took that realization and I made a commitment. I just made this commitment to myself and to the universe that I was going to have a relationship with those three qualities, where both people told the truth, both people took responsibility for things that came up rather than going for the victim position, and both people were going to be so committed to their creativity that it didn't occur to them to create conflict about that. So it took every problem that I'd ever had in relationship and kind of compressed it into one commitment. Well, the following month, I met Katie. After all those years of unsatisfying relationships, once I got clear on what I really wanted, the three big things that I wanted, it only took me a month. And so I think that's one takeaway learning is, once you get clear, it doesn't have to take you very long. Doesn't matter if you're 34 or 24 or 14 or 74. We've had couples in our office right here that have been together like they're in their 70s, and they've been together 50 years, and they're still wanting to make their relationship better. They don't have anything that you would call problems, but they want to just create more and more life to live. So we always say you don't have to be sick in order to get better. You don't have to have a bad relationship in order to have a better relationship. But in my case, I was starting from scratch. And so the next month I met Katie, and I was incredibly attracted to her. But our first conversation, I wanted to ask her out for a cup of coffee. And I said to her, I just had this big realization about relationship. And I named off these three things. And I said, and I only want to have relationships where both people are honest, both people are committed to taking responsibility rather than victim, and both people are committed to their creativity. So on those terms, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? And it was my best ever pickup line, because it's been good for 43 years of bliss now.
Congratulations. That is such an accomplishment. I know you two truly embody this. And this is such a message of hope for anybody tuning in that maybe you've never had role models. And so like your younger self, you've just kind of sworn off relationships, because who would want them if it just means this suffering? And so just to keep the faith that more is probably available, and you don't have to be born with this innate knowing of how to be in a healthy, conscious, thriving relationship. It's really something that we can all learn, and that I love for both of it. Sounds like kind of out of the challenges, whether witnessing them, experiencing them, it's like then we got to give birth to the greatest version of our love. So I love hearing that. Thanks so much. And those are three powerful commitments to make. I remember when we first came to one of your seminars and you and Katie announced that, well, I don't know how many years you're going on now, that you hadn't done any blame or criticism. Do you still have the tally going of how many years now?
Well, I know we haven't had a word of blame or criticism since we lived in this house, which has been now since 2001. So what's that, 21 years. I remember something back in the 90s, and I can't even remember the content of it, but I remember there was something we had back in the 90s But no, we haven't in the last 20 years anyway. We haven't had a word of blame or criticism, or really nobody said a cross word in this house since we bought it in 2001.
That just gives you like a rush of energy and inspiration. So can you share with us what is the cost in your perspective of blame and criticism, and what is it like to be in this relationship? I know that's something that we have adapted from you, is this shared commitment. And I'd love to hear how that's been for you.
Well, commitment is really the heart and soul of it. That's the only way to get started on any big life change. And so when Katie and I got together, we actually, in our first year, we made, we just sat down and like a wedding vow, made formal commitments to each other that I commit to revealing rather than concealing. That became one of our foundation commitments. I commit to taking healthy responsibility under stress rather than blaming and criticizing. So that became another big one. I commit to learning from every relationship interaction. That's a really big one. Then later on, when we discovered all the stuff in the Big Leap and the Genius Zone, we made a commitment to bringing forth our own individual genius every day, and also a commitment to bringing forth the genius of the relationship. So what is the genius of our relationship? Well, once we kind of figured out that, right away, suddenly Oprah Winfrey called, and, we were doing the same thing in front of 10 million people that we were doing in our living room with a dozen couples. And it's all based on the same natural principles, though. You don't really have to learn anything special other than a different way of communicating and a different way of being with yourself. It's all things that are doable. And, we've taught these things to junior high school students, and they come up and express their appreciation for it afterwards. So you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winning Stanford graduate or anything like that. You can put these principles into action all the time. They just take some work and practice, though, because, like for me, I was, as a man growing up in the 20th century, when I was growing up, kind of like the male model was somebody like John Wayne. He was tough. He never communicated. He was the strong, silent type. And, that was kind of like the thing. All the males were these cool guys that never, showed any emotion or anything like that. But those are tragic qualities to bring to a relationship. You cannot function in a close relationship without being on a good conversational relationship with your emotions. Like I remember in my own life, the moment, I was criticizing Katie for something. We were about a year into our relationship, and I was saying something critical to her. And as I was saying it, though, I realized, oh, I'm not angry. My voice sounds angry, but I feel scared inside. And so I just blurted out, I feel scared right now. And, she was getting kind of cringing from me hassling her about whatever I was hassling her about. And suddenly she kind of came out of that and said, oh, and that made us realize that when anyone says something authentic in a relationship, authentic and unarguable, something like, I feel scared right now, that changes everything in a relationship, because that puts it in the here and now, in the present. Whereas if you're saying, oh, I was mad at you for coming home late last Thursday, you're complaining about something that already happened, and you're talking about it as if it's happening right now. But what might be happening right now is you might feel sad or scared about it. And that's what I learned, that anytime I was angry, I was also scared. And if I communicated about that, things went much better. The argument stopped. If I said, I feel scared right now, or I'm hurt, I feel hurt, and I'm not sure what to do about that. If I could just communicate those spontaneous, authentic things, then we solve problems in minutes or seconds sometimes that would take days otherwise.
How beautiful. This is such a takeaway for everyone. I love the agreements, the commitments that you and Katie have made. So inspiring, and an invitation for everyone listening to, maybe you have some kind of unconscious agreements, but to make some really intentional conscious agreements, and your chances of experiencing an amazing relationship will go up exponentially. And then I love what you're saying about sharing what's really there. So that's the invitation. If you feel anger or something on the surface, it's like, is there something deeper and more vulnerable, and something that we're actually scared of? And to really get to the inarguable truth. I love that teaching of yours so much.
Yes, and so many people, you mentioned unconscious agreements. A lot of couples that we see come in have an unconscious agreement that's something like, I won't grow if you don't either. Yeah, it's an agreement to keep the status quo, but people aren't designed to keep the status quo, especially in the 21st century. You want to have the fullness of life. You want to experience the abundance of yourself and the most abundance and creativity that you can as a human being. That's just one of the things that we know now that makes us feel good. Maybe they didn't realize that 100 years ago. Like I remember talking to my granddad once when he was like 90 something. He passed away when he was 93, but he was very articulate up until the very end. And I was talking to him. I was in graduate school at that time, and I was taking a course in how to work with self-esteem or something. And he asked me, what's self-esteem? And I was telling him about it. And I asked him, did he ever think about that sort of thing when he was growing up? And he said, I spent a lot of my days as a teenager on the north end of a south-facing mule, he said, and plowing a field. He said, I really didn't think much about my self-esteem at the time, and he actually ran away from home to get away from the farm. And times have really changed now, and what our demands on each other are as human beings have changed. And so now, if you're married to a strong, silent type, you probably complain about it rather than being happy about it. You like the strength, but you'd like him to communicate now and then.
Yeah. So much of your work is about this expansion and aliveness and living in our genius zone. That was one of the moments that I remember. So we were sitting in class with you, and you came in. I remember I was just like hanging on every word, and you were sharing how you spend the majority of your life in your genius zone. And of course, I just want to credit Gay, because there are a couple terms I'd love to explore with you that have become globally recognized. And one is the genius zone. And Gay is the one that I think really brought this to the forefront of our awareness. And so thankful for you. And I remember you sharing that your life kind of became a progression, that maybe you were spending 10% of your life in your genius zone, and then more and more and more until you were up to like 80, 90%. And I left that workshop and I was like, that's starting today, I want to spend as many waking moments as possible in my genius zone. So thank you for modeling that. And do you want to share more about that? Because of course it's so applicable to our own lives. And also why does that matter for relationships, that we support each other in kind of our evolving and awakening and expansion?
Yes. Well, your genius zone, first of all, in my definition of genius, it's not some wild and crazy person out in the forest inventing formulas or anything like that. It's doing what you most love to do and what you're most uniquely suited to do. To me, that's part of it, is by being able to find out, what do I love to do so much that I do it all day free if I had money coming in from something else to pay my life expenses with. So what would I do? What would I do if I were doing all day what I love to do? The second aspect of genius is, to me, genius is partly what makes a contribution to other people. What can you do? What can I do that I'm uniquely suited to do that makes a contribution to other people's lives? To me, when I'm in the sweet spot of doing what I most love to do and what makes a contribution to other people, that to me is life at its best. And so I put my attention on that back in the 1980s. And yes, you mentioned when I first started thinking about this, I realized, gosh, I'm only spending an hour a day, probably out of my 9 hours of my workday, doing what I most love to do. So let me start seeing if I can bump that up a little bit. So I think the first goal I set was 30%, 3 hours out of 9 hours, I wanted to be spending in my genius zone. And I worked on that and got it bumped up from there. It took a year or two. Not going to take you guys that long because now you have the book to guide you. I didn't have the book at the time, so I obviously hadn't written The Big Leap, so I didn't know how the rules worked in terms of accessing your genius. But so I put a priority on it, and I then put a priority once I got there of 50% and then 70%. But by the end of the century, from 1980 to 1999, I went from 10% up to pretty much 100%. And for the last 20 some years, I've definitely been in that sweet spot where I haven't really done anything I don't love to do over the past 20 or 25 years. And that's a very wonderful feeling, because at the end of the day, I mean, whoever feels tired if they've been doing what they love to do all day, So I haven't had that kind of fatigue in as long as I can remember, because I've been dedicated on I'm living in my sweet spot. And to me, like in The Big Leap, I have this universal mantra I give about, I expand every day in love, abundance, and creativity as I inspire other people to do the same. So that became my life purpose way back there a long time ago. And that's essentially how I spend my time now.
Oh, Gay, thank you for sharing that and making that so, accessible for others. So Big Leap, one of my favorite. I have recommended this to more people than I can possibly say. Another notion we will explore that comes from this book I'd love to talk about, and that you live this. I think for a lot of people, we look for evidence of what's possible. And if there isn't a whole lot of evidence, it's really easy to settle and think like, this is as good as it gets. I guess I'm just supposed to feel exhausted and disconnected from my soul and whatever it might be. And so thanks for being an enthusiast. And I join you in that for really what's possible and available for us. And I hope those of you listening and tuning in kind of receive the transmission of someone who has done this now for, great lengths of time. And this really is possible. So your Genius Zone. Yes. And the Genius Zone is now out and available, that book, which kind of expands on. So let's talk about the Big Leap. The Big Leap. So another term that Gay coined that is now spread around the globe. I credit you for this and quote you in so many of the retreats and trainings and workshops I do. So this notion of the upper limit problem. It's so good. So can you share, what is the upper limit problem? And since this is the Thriving Relationship Show, what might it look like if it's lurking in our relationship?
Well, the upper limit problem is the tendency to sabotage ourselves when things start going better. And almost everybody has a stack of examples of that. You may have gone on a diet, which went great for 3 days, and then you just found yourself having to have the double, triple thick super cheeseburger and vanilla malt down at the burger shop and sabotage your diet. But the upper limit problem, you might call it an allergy to feeling good or an allergy to having things go well. So when you start things go well, then you break out in your old upper limit allergy and you pull back. So the upper limit problem is something that blocks being in the zone of genius. So if you're going to handle one problem that keeps you from getting into your zone of genius, work on the upper limit problem. Start looking at how you sabotage yourself from feeling good, or how you mess up the flow of love in a close relationship. Like, since we're working on relationships, some of the main upper limit problems would be blame and criticism. People get to a flow of positive energy, and then they get to their upper limit of that, and then somebody says, hey, why did you do blah, blah, blah yesterday? And the other one says, what about you? You did blah, blah, blah last week. And the other one says, yeah, but 3 years ago, you did blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon they're fighting about something that's been fought about for 29 years, maybe. In relationships, couples tend to only fight about certain specific areas: kids, chores, sex, money. They're only a handful of things, but those things take up an enormous amount of stress time in relationship. Like, for example, we had a couple in here a while back who had been married for 30 years, and they finally read the book, and they came in and they said, we realize we've had the same argument every week for 29 years now. Wow. It drives me nuts sometimes that people will put up with things not working well for so long. Like if you had a pain in your right bicuspid, nobody would deal with that for 30 years and keep trying, saying, gosh, I got to find another way to hold my mouth so that doesn't hurt, or I've got to make sure I don't eat anything hard so that doesn't hurt me. No, we wouldn't put up with that, but we'll put up with relationship stuff for literally years. So big takeaway from this rant on my part is, if you spot a problem, get on it sooner rather than later. Don't let it go by for 29 years. So another thing that has to do with the upper limit problem is they happen internally as well as relationship. And so, in other words, you'll get to feeling good, or you'll wake up and you'll be feeling good until 10 o'clock. And then suddenly a self-criticism pops into your mind. Why can't you be more like Sally Joe with the thin thighs and who goes to the gym every day? And you're sitting at home, maybe drinking out of a can of Hershey's syrup or something like that. And you're saying, why can't I be more like her? So it's an upper limit thought, rather than putting down the Hershey syrup and picking up a glass of water. That's something you could actually have control over. So worry thoughts are one of the biggest upper limit problems because, and notice this, everybody, 99% of your worry thoughts are about things you have absolutely no control over. Huh? You mean most of the worry thoughts that go through our mind are completely useless in terms of changing anything? Yep. Because if you think about it for a moment, most people are having worry thoughts about the future or about the past. And those two things are completely out of our control. There are some things, good things you can do to influence the future. You could write down on a piece of paper something you need to do later on that day. But most of us don't do that. Most of us just sit around and worry about that thing we've got to do all day long and don't actually just write it down. And so a good amount of the traffic jam and horn honking in your mind could be replaced if you simply followed one main thing, which is letting go of control of things we don't have any control over. Letting go of trying to go back and reshuffle the past. Letting go of worrying about the future. Instead, do some planning about the future. Write some things down. But those things that rattle around in our heads, most of them are useless in terms of making your life any better. They're just recycled stuff or worry thoughts about the future. So put your focus on when you have worry thoughts and realize that almost none of them have anything to do with anything that'll make your life better. Another thing to know about the upper limit problem is that all upper limit problems are driven by fear. And there's only a small handful of fears that you really need to know about. And you need to know about them because when you get in the middle of an upper limit problem, all you have to do is tune into that fear and name it, and it starts clearing up. One of the big fears that comes up for people all the time is a fear in relationship of I'm fundamentally flawed in some way. I was born the wrong way, or I had the wrong growing up, or I had, something is wrong with me. And I'm here to tell you, there's nobody like that. We all have stuff we need to learn, but you don't have to hold them as flaws. You simply need to hold them as something you need to learn and put your attention on that. But if you sit around feeling bad about being fundamentally flawed, that robs the energy that you could be spending on actually doing something that improved the quality of your life or improved the quality of relationship. A second big fear that people a lot in our area have our audiences are, often very compassionate people. They're very well-meaning people. They're people who are seeking to have a better life. And so one of their big problems, though, is what I call the fear of outshining, which is the fear of really letting yourself shine. So many people in our audience they're used to being caretakers, they're used to letting other people go first. They're used to helping other people with their stuff. But what we have to do is make a benign investment in our own stardom in a way. That doesn't mean you have to appear on stage, but to be the star of your own life, to be the kind of life that you would want to watch a movie about. And that's a good criterion to place on ourselves. Do we have the kind of relationship that a movie director would come in and say, wow, people would really love to see that, and so I think that's a really great thing to position yourself for. So in other words, when upper limit problems come up, get good at getting down into your fear zone and talking about your fear directly rather than having it be pushed down and out of the way.
So good. So when an upper limit comes up, there's usually something that we're afraid of there and these limitations. So your encouragement is to make sure there aren't all this unnecessary suffering that we're creating, and instead expand into all the love, the connection, the fulfillment, all the wonderful things that are available. I know that Bret and I would notice when we were first trying on this concept is that we'd have like a date night, or we'd be out on a vacation, and maybe on the plane ride home or the drive home, we'd start like nitpicking or going over a to-do list, something that like brought the energy down. It's like, there we go. Let's open up to just how good it can be. So thanks for helping encourage humanity just to let go of all those unnecessary limitations and all the unnecessary pain that we bring ourselves, so we can spend a lot more moments enjoying this precious gift of life and contributing to the greater good. Yeah. So those are some of the fears to be on the lookout for. So not to outshine anyone or thinking that, something is fundamentally flawed inside of us. So good. So let's talk about creativity. That is another area I believe that you have passion around, you and Katie both. And how do you express creativity together? Why is this so important? And I'm also intrigued. I've heard you say that as we age, it becomes increasingly important. So I'm also just intrigued about that. So I believe you mentioned kind of in our 40s and especially 50s and beyond. So anybody that's in a relationship at any stage, any age, how can we cultivate creativity?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's important to make a commitment to your creativity and a commitment to supporting the creativity of your partner. And commitment is the place you really have to begin any kind of change project, because I always say to my students that the longest journey they'll ever take in their life is 12 inches from their head down to their heart. And what I mean by that is to get your head and your heart in harmony about what you're committed to. And that's so important, because without commitment, you just don't have any deep down in there motivation. So first of all, make a commitment to your creativity. Here at our institute, we say that every breath you draw after midlife is a breath of creativity or a breath of stagnation. And so which are you committed to? Like one of the great conversations of my life, my first time I went to Europe back in 1979 or so, I was sitting on a park bench in Paris, and I was just resting and sipping an espresso. And a woman came and sat down next to me on the park bench, and she had these brand new sneakers on. Turned out she was from Arizona and spoke English and everything. But I said, wow, new sneakers. And she said, yes, they're my 6th pair on this trip. And she said she was on a walking trip. And I said, really, 6 pairs? Where did you walk from, for gosh sakes? Arizona. She had walked all the way across the United States. Oh, even better. She told her husband she retired from her job at age 65. She'd been a school principal for 25 years. And that's for sure a job you'd want to retire from. I think, that must be a really stressful job, having students and parents in your ear all the time, plus all the teachers. But anyway, she retired at 65, and she told her husband, I'm going to walk around the world. Want to come with me? And he said, no. And I asked her why, what was his reason? And she said, he didn't want to miss his favorite TV shows. And the funny thing is, though, she didn't let that limit her. She said, okay, I'm going to walk around the world. You come visit me every 6 weeks or every 6 months or however. And great, we'll both have our lives. And so she took off. And first she walked to California. And then she decided she wanted to go the other direction. And so she walked all the way across to Maine and or Boston, and then caught a boat over to Europe and was walking her way across Europe. And when I met her, she'd been on the road for about a year and a half or something like that. And after about 5 minutes, she kind of bounced to her feet and said, well, I got to go. I've got to get to Portugal. and so she went trucking off across the park. And that was the last time I saw her. But I was so inspired by that here was a person at age 65, and I was only 35 or whatever it was at the time. So, she looked ancient to me at the time. Now, in my 70s, I can really feel the power of what she was talking about and why that's such a radical thing to do. Now, you all don't have to walk around the world to express your creativity, but there's something down in there that you want, or a bunch of things that we want to do creativity wise. And so we just have to make a commitment and pick a few and get those going. When I was in my 30s, along about the time I met Katie, I also made a commitment to creating a job that I would never want to retire from. That was my idea. And so that's how I kind of wended my way into gradually doing more and more of what I most love to do. And now, of course, as I said, 20 some years of only doing what I most love to do and what makes contributions to other people's lives. And I'll tell you, it makes for a beautiful life if you're constantly opening up to more and more of your own individual creativity, and also keeping in mind, how can I create to other people at the same time? One of my mentors, Abraham Maslow, said, it doesn't matter if you're making a genius soup or writing a genius symphony. It's whatever has the capacity to draw forth your creativity. The way Katie and I put it, do something every day creatively that has the capacity to surprise you. Like I'm a writer, and every day something I write makes me pause and say, oh, wow, that's cool. Or, it surprised me in some way. It came out in a new way. And so I think, our lives need, especially as we get up into our 40s and 50s, to be about what most matters. And, I've been at the deathbeds of a number of people over the years, some in my family and some in a couple of friends that called me to be by their bedside during their passing. And I can guarantee you that when people are on their deathbed, nobody's saying, gee, I wish I'd spent more time at the office, or gee, I wished I'd spent a lot more time around people that I don't care about. People are saying, oh, I wish I'd loved more, or, oh, I wish I'd forgiven my Uncle Charlie for whatever it was. It's things like that are down in there about what really matters. And to me, we are so blessed to have this wink of the eye experience on planet Earth, and we're one of 9 million species, but we happen to be the only one right now that can speak to each other on a TV screen about something interesting, or listen to a podcast. So we're very blessed, and I want us to make every magical moment of that count.
Big cheers to that. So if you're in a relationship now, or just in your individual life, to find that creative spark inside of you, and to nurture that and create space for that, and every day be really cultivating that, and all the unique expressions that might take. I love the story. That fills me up hearing about that woman on her journey. So it can take many forms, and how important that is. And I hear again and again, it's about making this commitment. So, make a commitment to yourself and to your partner. Maybe you don't even know, right, what that looks like right now. It starts with the commitment to expanding in your creative expression, your aliveness together. So, so lovely. And are there any practices that oh yeah, please.
Yes, I want to say one more thing, Christine, which is Katie and I have dedicated our relationship to bringing forth the genius of our relationship rather than just on our own individual relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
with ourselves. And
Yeah.
so what's that look like? Well, once we did that, we realized that we have a way we can communicate together that actually models what we're talking about. So we can actually show on Oprah or on the front of a, if we're on a front of a stage somewhere, we can actually show relationship at work, how we connect with each other. And I can't count the number of times people have come up after a seminar or after a talk, or they write us after we've been on a TV show and say, it wasn't so much the content of what you were talking about, but the way you spoke to each other and the way, like I had one famous talk show host come up to me after we'd been on his show, and he'd had a number of relationship problems. He was on his third or fourth marriage or something like that, a very suave looking guy. And he comes up to me after the show and he puts his arm around me, he whispers, he says, I noticed there was a way you communicate with your wife where you are looking directly at her and you seem genuinely interested in what she's saying. And he said, well, where did you learn that? Like it was a technique that I had learned in some kind of program or something. And I remember saying, I'm actually genuinely interested in what she's saying, and he said, oh, like it was, oh, I hadn't thought of that, And so I recommend just doing whatever work is necessary as a couple so that you're blown away by what's coming out of the other person's mouth all the time. Katie and I got out our calculators a while back and we figured out we'd been together for something like 17,000 days or something, 17,000 days and nights. And if you've done something that much, you need to find some genius ways of staying alive, and staying in a state of aliveness. And so I just think it's worth its weight in gold, whatever you need to do to invest in the quality of your relationships and the quality of your daily life. Meditate together, walk together, take walks together, whatever you can do to bring forth that essence quality of that flow between you.
And I will echo that in witnessing the two of you communicate. It's like this heart wide open, whole body engagement with one another. It is, exquisite to bear witness to. And that is just, it's like so many things that you've shared come together in that, to be interested and engaged and present, and to really be cultivating the things that make us interesting, all in service to the greater good, to keep that aliveness. And is there anything else? So this is the Thriving Relationship Show. One question I love to actually ask people is, which you've shared lots about this year, so much of your career has been devoted to this. And in a nutshell, what would you say? What is a thriving relationship to you?
A thriving relationship to me is one in which you can actually feel the flow of loving connection between you, not just know about it in your mind, but actually feel it, just like you can feel your breathing every moment. So that's one quality of it. A second one is that in each other's presence, you get more creative rather than less creative. One of the big complaints when people leave relationships that they've been in that have been troubled, one of them is, I never felt acknowledged or seen. Another one is, the other person never listened to my feelings or never asked me about that or never told me about that. And another common complaint when people leave relationship is just, I couldn't stand the criticism. I couldn't stand being blamed that much anymore. So what we did was we just went around and found how to solve those problems. And they're not that hard, but they do require some commitment and dedication. They don't come to you easily in the middle of the night.
You're hearing from, yes, please, Gay.
Oh, and I also, just while we're on the subject, before we finish, I wanted to appreciate you and your husband for dedicating your lives to living in the genius of your relationship, because it's obvious from talking to you that you're in your genius zone doing right now what you're doing. And so the more you can do things like that, I mean, that's a great blessing and a gift itself, and it has unlimited possibilities to it.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor and joy. I'm so thankful to have the felt sense when you talk about what it's like to tap into that. Every day we wake up to feel the preciousness and the aliveness and the gift of getting to express what wants to come through us in a way that lights us up. So thank you. I'm deeply, deeply honored to get to do what we do and to be part of this great, great human team. And I love what you were just sharing, and really encourage all of you to take that in, those words of wisdom and learning from people. So Gay, people have reached out to Gay, also reached out to us in their moments of great difficulty, and they've learned what doesn't work. And so here's the antidote. And just to know, if anybody is in a difficult moment right now, like this is a brand new moment that has never been here before. And with a commitment and an opening up to what's possible, it's really extraordinary what's available. And Gay, thank you for being a pioneer and a trailblazer, a visionary, a true Renaissance man. I remember when Bret and I first met you, Bret's like, I never had heard him describe somebody as a Renaissance man until we first had the great privilege of learning from you. And you truly, truly are that. Do you have any final words? I also will make sure we put in the show notes, of course, all the links to all the places that you can follow along on Gay's journey, both sharing lots of personal development as well as your mystery novels, which is just the best.
Yes, I write mystery novels about a Tibetan Buddhist private detective, and another series about a Victorian era dandy named Sir Errol Hyde. And I have a lot of fun with them. I have, 6 of the Tibetan Buddhist ones out, and I have 2 more in the pipeline. So that's a lot of fun.
Of course you do. Just forever creating. You are prolific in your creativity. And it's a testament to, if we can just eliminate all the time we spend worrying and just creating all these upper limit problems, like look at what opens up to us. So any final words, anything else you want to share, Gay?
Well, on our little wristband that you get at the end of trainings here, it says breathe, move, love. And those 3 things, just remember, it's all free. Breathing is free, and so is movement, keeping ourselves moving alive, and also to love as much as you can from wherever you find yourself.
Breathe, move, love. Yes, yes, yes. It has been a sacred treat and joy to get to connect with you. Thank you so much. Every word you shared, what a blessing. Soak it up, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for expanding these ripples of love into the world. Thank you so much, Gay. Blessings upon blessings on everything you continue to create, and to all of you on your journey. So much love to everyone. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Want more support for your relationship, or want to become trained as a certified relationship coach to help other couples? We warmly welcome you to head on over to centerthrive.com. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you next time on the Thriving Relationship Show.